Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. We welcome you to what we anticipate is going to be a very interesting and exciting podcast today. And we are pleased to welcome to Seekers of Meaning David Bernstein, the founder and CEO of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. The Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. David, welcome to Seekers of Meaning. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you to my colleague, Rabbi Salkin, for making the shidduch. And it's good to see you, even through, especially on the Zoom machine here or whatever we are on.
Good to be here.
The Jewish Institute for Liberal Values is a pretty new organization. What is it, and why is it important now?
Sure. So I've been a Jewish professional my entire life. In my last job, I was CEO of a Jewish umbrella organization that brings together the Jewish community relations field to fight various challenges. And I have to say, in the last year or so after the George Floyd killing, I felt that there was a shrinking of the not only American conversation, but the Jewish conversation, and that it was becoming more and more ideologically charged and more difficult to have authentic and true conversations about race and racism in this country. Certain voices were being stifled, certain voices were being elevated, and that wasn't good for democracy, and it was not good for Jewish institutions. I started to see that Jewish organizations that were known for their deliberative processes around various issues were now stifling dissent and insisting that there was only one way to understand these issues. And I also started to notice that this ideology, which you could call woke ideology, you could call critical social justice ideology, was spawning a new variant of anti-Semitism as well that we became concerned with. And so I left that position a little over a year ago to start the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. Fortunately, I'm not the only one who saw the problem as I did. There were some key funders in place who helped us get going, and we've really been able to build quickly. We have 3 full-time staff people now working on these issues and building educational programs and the like. And I could talk to you a little bit more about what that involves, but what we're trying to do is go back to the kind of authentic, open conversations that the Jewish community is known for. It's a hallmark of the Jewish community. Machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven. I believe that that's been shunted aside in the current ideological environment, and we need to restore some of these liberal principles to Jewish life and then play a role as Jews in the larger American discussion on these issues.
Jewish values such as what?
Openness to debate. The idea of Hillel and Shammai, the idea that you could have 2 distinct houses that have feuds over law, but they think highly enough to not only have constructive debate, but also to even cite the other houses, the Hillel house of Hillel at least, cites Shammai's ruling in the way that it ruled. That's the kind of discussion that I think we need to go back to. Debate is a hallmark of Jewish life. And fostering debate is very important. Stifling debate, I would argue, is inimical to Jewish values. And I think that's where we're moving toward in many of our institutions. You can't talk about controversial issues around race and racism in a way that violates any of the orthodoxies or pieties today. You can't have discussions over sensitive issues like gender ideology and identity that I think are important discussions to have, and where there might be difference of opinion. And we learn from each other when we debate each other, when we allowed different ideas to flourish, and then we actually tend to find the right answer over time, but only if you allow those alternative viewpoints. So that's, to me, is a key Jewish value.
So, David, you mentioned that what for you the tipping point was the George Floyd thing, which was recent. This just didn't emerge in the last year and a half, 2 years. In your opinion, as you said, been working in the Jewish community for years. Where was the genesis of this? Because it's true. I mean, there is no civility left at all, and we have colleagues on pulpits across the denominational line who are afraid and I use that word advisedly, to really speak to the tachlis of ethical Jewish prophetic values, for fear that the executive committee of the congregation will meet immediately afterwards and say you have no right to speak. You've offended this members of the congregation. And we're seeing that. Where did this start, in your opinion?
Right. So look, these are always been tensions in the pulpit when, Jews disagree with each other. And some people, when they disagree, aren't okay with that disagreement. They want to force rabbis and others to conform to sort of their viewpoint. And whenever one speaks about an issue that's important in public life, they're liable to offend somebody. That's been around a long time. What's a bit newer, although it's been brewing in the discourse, and it comes out of the academy, is an ideology which says two things. One is that oppression and bias are built into the very fabric of society. In other words, racism is not just a matter of somebody's individual attitudes, but it's a societal-wide phenomena, and it's in the air, in the oxygen. The other basic premise of this ideology is that only people who have been negatively affected by it, only its victims, only people with lived experience have the standing to define the world for everybody else. This is sometimes together referred to as critical social justice ideology, or colloquially it's referred to as wokeness. And that ideology has gained favor within sort of the civil rights establishment in the United States, and it's now found its way into various institutions. And it's not that it's completely wrong. I'm not saying that bias isn't sometimes embedded in system society. I believe it is. I'm not saying that people with lived experience don't have anything to offer the rest of us. Of course they do. As a Jew who's experienced anti-Semitism, I'd like to think that if you're a non-Jew, you'd want to hear what I have to say about anti-Semitism, and someone who's experienced it. But it doesn't give me the right to say that's the final word on what anti-Semitism is to the rest of the world. And I think, so the premises of liberalism is that that the conversation remains open, that we want to hear people in good faith talk about why there might be racism or why there might be differences of outcome among different groups. And we don't want to silence any one voice that means well. We want to open that conversation and allow those expressions of disagreement. That has now gone from being sort of a fringe view in society directly in the mainstream, not just of Jewish organizations, but also in Jewish organizations and in congregational life. So if you're somebody who doesn't necessarily buy into that set of views and values, you may find yourself at odds with an important constituency. Now, I mean, it's not the first time this has happened. You could argue the same thing was happening around Israel. That if you were somebody who believed Israel wasn't perfect and you wanted to express an alternative view, you might be called on the carpet by somebody on the sort of hawkish Jewish right. And now I'm saying that, okay, that's true. And that we have to change that dynamic in order to allow people to express differences of opinion around Israel. But we also have to make sure that people feel comfortable, expressing differences of opinion around social issues and race and racism and the like, and where it exists and where it doesn't exist, and what it explains and what it doesn't explain.
What are people afraid of?
So I think that there are people who want us to believe, that the only acceptable way to talk about disparities in society is that that the oppressors are oppressing the oppressed. And that's the only way of talking about those issues. And so they're trying to impose a single discourse on society. A lot of other people who might question that are afraid of being called out. And that's what I mean by cancel culture. It's not that you're just going to be fired or canceled if you say something, although that can happen, but rather that you're walking on eggshells around these conversations all the time because you might not agree with that basic premise. And so I think that's what people are afraid of. There's certain people who are afraid of opening the conversation, and other people are afraid of being called out if they express an alternative point of view.
Historically, and at least in my rabbinate especially, major Jewish institutions, such as the denominational institutions, were at the forefront of making great social justice statements. Many colleagues of my generation now take a look at some of these institutions and some of the denominational structures as being very cautious on certain areas of social justice concern. about not making statements or pulling back. Is that your experience? And if so, why? What's going on with the traditional Jewish institutional framework?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think Jewish organizations have always spoken out on issues of social justice. The question is, what is social justice? See, I think that that there's an argument to be had that good social justice requires, like everything else, argument. That people have to, maybe a political conservative, and I'm not one, I'm a liberal, I'm a center-left person, but maybe a political conservative believes that social justice is providing enterprise zones, as Jack Kemp, the former HUD secretary, once argued. Maybe there are different versions of making society, or different plans of making society a better place. And I'm trying to make the argument that we have to hear those out. And that today there's a shrinking of that conversation about what constitutes social justice. I can tell you that the Reform denomination, I think, is also going in that direction of too often this stifling dissent. And not allowing or not encouraging those kind of conversations. I can tell you that there's a diversity seminar that's being offered to rabbis of various denominations that was sent to me by a rabbi. And it said, this is a diversity training for Reform rabbis and clergy. This space is for white clergy and will serve as a white anti-racist affinity space. A white anti-racist affinity space is one where white people can process their emotions and deepen their understanding around race and racism without burdening or causing additional harm to people of color. That is the premise of this diversity training that Reform clergy are being asked to participate in. I think that is not open to alternative ways of looking at the world. I think that is saying that there's only one way to understand these issues, and that and your job is to process your feelings so that you can reconcile with our perspective. Now, look, I grew up in a Reform temple. I have great fondness for Reform Judaism. I think the prophetic voice is extremely important, but I also think it always has to be balanced against machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven, and I think that's being lost.
So on that, I think that's through the CCAR. Which is the Reform Rabbinic Organization.
It's not. It's part of. It's from through the RAC. It's from the RAC and URG. Yeah.
Okay. The Religious Action Center, which is the Reform lobby in Washington, and the Union for Reform Judaism, for whom I worked for 30 some years in another lifetime. But if you were creating that, how would you change that approach? What word would you change?
What I would do is I would educate people, and we're trying to devise a curriculum along these lines, actually. We're right now calling it Machloket. I'm not sure that's going to be the final name of it. But what I would do is I would tee up the various viewpoints around diversity in society. I would ask congregants or clergy, whoever you happen to be training, what does Ibrahim X. Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, what does he have to say about race and racism? And I would also ask, what is John McWhorter, the black professor from Columbia University who thinks Kendi's out of his mind? What does he have to say, and why does he think Kendi is out of his mind? I would want to know what various perspectives there are on these issues and allow people to discuss them in a constructive way. Because I don't think that these issues are resolved in the body politic, and I think we're pretending that they are, and then we're trying to impose that single view on everybody else. And I think that's not the way to do it, and I don't think that that's consistent with traditional Jewish values.
So let's get to the tachlis of the institute. Again, we're talking to David Bernstein, who is the CEO and founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. You're talking about what you're trying to do, your website, and real fast, what's the website in case somebody wants to go to Google and Google you?
Sure. It's jilv.org.
jilv.org. Okay. So, we go to your website. How are you going to educate us? What are some of the outreach programs that the Institute is developing? And if I wanted to take advantage of them, how do I do that?
Sure. So one of the things that we're actually developing is sort of a rabbinical council. We had a letter that was signed by 250 mostly Reform and conservative rabbis that was put together by Rabbi David Wolpe of prominent conservative rabbi out of Los Angeles, and several other rabbis, several Reform rabbis were involved with it as well, including our mutual friend Rabbi Jeff Salkin. These rabbis cited the concern and about this ideology and the stifling of the conversation in Jewish life, and suggested that we open up that conversation. They also cited the concern, by the way, that this ideology may spawn a new variant of anti-Semitism, which is something that we try to educate the Jewish community on as well. So we welcome any rabbis or cantors into that rabbinical council. We are also doing live stream events, and we have a new curriculum, as I said, that is being developed, but will be out soon. So any congregations that want to do exactly what I suggested, to have really heartfelt discussions that are willing to entertain all sides of the issues around these issues like anti-racism and racism, we'll have a framework for them to have those conversations. We're happy to sponsor individual conversations with individual congregations as well. We're also trying to develop an alternative approach to social justice, which I'm calling it a bigger tikkun olam right now, that allows different voices to express how they view tikkun olam in social justice, so that we don't create a very small tikkun olam tent that only allows certain ideological perspectives to be expressed. We are doing some advocacy work where we try to advocate for Jewish institutions to take a more pluralistic, open stance on these issues. And we're also building bridges to other ethnic communities, like particularly Asian American groups and Black heterodox thinkers, groups that are equally concerned as us that the conversation in this country has gone off the rails, and we're making common cause with them.
So the advocacy thing, let's take an example what's going on in sadly too many states right now. Attempts to control election, attempts to limit women's right to choose, attempts to ban books. This represents a clear and present danger to liberal values.
It does.
So how does the Institute begin to respond to that? Or is this, outside the purview of what you want to create?
Yeah. So those are a lot of issues. I mean, look, I'm very pro-choice. I've been involved in pro-choice politics most of my career. I'm certainly a major supporter of voting rights. I've been involved in those issues, criminal justice reform likewise. But we're more involved in sort of some of the cultural conversation. I think book banning would come closer to what we're concerned with. And there we're concerned about it happening on both the right and the left. Of course, you have forces on the right. I'm not even sure that these are good descriptors anymore, right and left. But you have forces on the right who want to ban books like Mouse, for example, in Tennessee. You saw that, which is a book about the Holocaust. And I think that's absurd. But there's also people on the left that are trying to ban, To Kill a Mockingbird, because it presents, what they would consider the white savior complex. And I think we have to be concerned about both, and we should oppose book banning on both sides of the ideological aisle, and we should try to carve out as much space as possible for book reading and for conversations around books, including and especially controversial books.
You mentioned a couple of times that you're concerned with, quote, a new variant of anti-Semitism, unquote. Walk me through that. Unpack what you see as a new variant of anti-Semitism as a result of the woke culture.
Sure. So my son's public school is in the process of developing an anti-racist audit. And in the anti-racist audit report, they say that they would like the new social studies curriculum to teach students to recognize and resist systems of oppression. Now, I want my kids to discuss those issues, but I don't want them to be told exactly what constitutes a system of oppression and what isn't. And I fear that paradigm, that oppressor versus oppressed paradigm, will be used to describe Israel as an oppressive state and will be used to see Jews as a privileged class. And it is happening already. I believe that this idea of equity, which used to mean sort of equality of people, is now being used to say that any differences in group outcomes automatically means that one group is discriminated against. And I think the world is more complicated than that. And I think sometimes in order to get to lift up minority groups, you have to invest in them from the traditionally marginalized communities over long periods of time. And this equity concept tries to create perfect parity in the here and now. And I think that that's dangerous for Jews, because it says that if you're a community that has traditionally succeeded, on average, that means that you're oppressing people who have underperformed or have not yet gotten to that achievement or income. And I think that's problematic. It's problematic for Jews, and it's problematic for Asian Americans and other groups that sort of exceed the mean. So I think these are various ways that that this ideology is fomenting a new variant of anti-Semitism. And it's no accident that when we saw the Gaza war in May of 2021, it felt very different from previous rounds, because this ideology had empowered people to look at the world, had enabled people and empowered that paradigm to look at the world as oppressor versus oppressor, no nuance, only one side could be wrong and one side could be right. And I think that's what this ideology is creating, and that's not good for Jews. It's not good for Jews. And that's why I think we need to create more nuanced conversations, not binary conversations.
We also need to create a new vocabulary, because you've alluded to this a couple times that, left, right, what do they mean anymore? And we struggle with language, don't we? And language is a wedge to divide people.
I've been called sort of, by certain people, alt-right or whatever. I support free choice, criminal justice reform, immigrant rights. I mean, if you go down the list of traditional social issues, I'm probably 80 to 90% Democratic. Yet I'm critiquing this discourse on the left because I'm fearful it's going to alienate a lot of people on the left, who will then say, well, I can't relate to that. And I think it's already happening. I think it's terrible politics. But I also, and I want to protect my traditional backyard, the left, from what's happened on the segments of the right, which is, sort of conspiracy theories and ideologies and populism and so forth. I think that process is also underway on the left. And I think it's best opposed by people who are of the left themselves, who say, listen, this is not what I want my ideological backyard to look like. I'm not comfortable here. Let's try to make sure we carve out space for ourselves. So left and right may not work well. I think there are people who probably would have considered themselves on the left who moved to the right and vice versa. And we have to think carefully about what terms we use and how to describe this.
I want to just ask you just to play around with this idea, because a couple of my colleagues and I have been talking about this a lot in the last 6 months, given everything that's happening, especially with the focus of the Institute within the context of the American system. And given what we may be facing in the next couple of years, your opinion, is the system that we have right now in the United States of America, is it broken?
Yeah.
Or just,
I think it's wounded. I think the social media culture has fundamentally shifted our politics. It's not the only thing afoot. We had gerrymandering, for example, in our political system that allowed districts to become extremely Republican or extremely Democratic. And that elected a whole slew of people that are beholden to the extremes in the party. That has not been healthy for our democracy. And then you combine that with a social media culture, echo chamber, that allows people to sort of curate their own news and to only hear from the right or the left. There's no common narrative as well, and to be susceptible to sort of extreme ideologies. I think that's problematic as well. Is that the system broken? Perhaps to a degree, but maybe there are policy solutions to some of these problems. But I think a lot of it is sort of, we have to scale up critical thinking in society. When Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather narrated the national narrative at 6 p.m. every day, we had a common narrative. We might have disagreed about a lot of things, but you could go back and listen to them in the way that they talked about America and its founding and who we were. There was sort of a common understanding of what this country stood for. That's been lost in this current polarized environment. And I think we have to find ways of reclaiming sort of a common narrative. And part of that is also making sure that we have people who are capable of recognizing fake news and recognizing skewed ideologies that come from either side of the political spectrum, and are critical thinkers. And so this is a long-term project that requires some policy intervention, but also a lot of social change to make sure that people can withstand the ideological assault coming in both directions.
One of the areas that we've talked about on the podcast and also in my work, but I'm anxious to get your take on it so far as the of what the Institute stands for and what you hope to do. Have you had any attempt to do some any in-reach or outreach to seminaries, to rabbinic seminaries, the next generation of rabbis, cantors, educators?
We haven't. I think it's in the long run critical. It's something I would love to do. I do worry that a younger generation of Reform, conservative, Reconstructionist rabbis are becoming too ideologically charged. I do worry that, and I've heard, by the way, from professors at HUC and other places that have said to me that they're almost scared of their own students, that their students are calling them out on some, ideological violation, and they walk on eggshells. I don't think that's the kind of rabbinate that's going to help people navigate the ideological and religious and cultural currents of our time. And I worry that Reform and conservative Judaism have skewed toward the prophetic and away from the priestly role of the rabbi. In other words, the rabbi can play both of those roles. They can be a prophet and they can warn us of the, of our moral turpitude, but they can also be the priest, the person that brings us together and helps us mediate conflict and think about what the psychological ramifications of our actions are. And I think we need more of that second category, and a little less prophet. More priest, less prophet. And I think that we could do that by engaging rabbinical schools over time. And that's going to come because some rabbinical leaders and heads of rabbinical schools say, you know what, we have a problem here, and it's time that we bring in other voices here to help us think it through.
Yeah, I would hope that over the course of the next year or so, that at least you would be invited to just talk to
Sure.
you or one of the staff, to get into, and there's not only the traditional like HUC or JTS, but the Reconstructionists, the Olive Seminary, the Boston Hebrew, the Academy. There's so many options now, but these people are going out into the field, and not only rabbinic students, but educational students, cantorial students, Jewish communal service students.
They do.
They touch people. And so I don't want to tell you what to do, but I would hope that in the long run, as you said, that this would be maybe somebody on the staff to just focus on not only congregational outreach, but also seminarian outreach. Could be a very, very interesting, even as I'm thinking about this, opportunities for seminary interns to come and spend some time with the Institute and take that message back to the school.
And, for us, an organization that's not even hit its first year, we're at about 10 months right now. It's a matter of sequencing. And, our first order of business was, can we find a critical mass of rabbis who share with us our view that there's a problem? And we did. We were able to find 250 rabbis who signed this letter that I think was very powerful. And now the next question is, okay, what do we do with those rabbis? And some of those rabbis, by the way, do come from seminaries. And can we interest them in broader dialogues? Every day we are welcomed into more spaces in the Jewish community. Every day I'm having more conversations with the mainstream Jewish community, who says, we agree that there are issues here, there are tensions, and are welcoming us in the conversation. 10 months ago, I had fewer takers than what I do today. So I feel like we're making progress, and it would not surprise me at all if in 6 months from now, we're not in active dialogue with the rabbinical seminaries.
Well, obviously you've touched a nerve, a positive way, because I think there is, I don't think that's a lie. I know that there is this need to have some sense of balance, civility, brought into the concept of the dialogue just of what's going on right now. And there is a concern about, as you would call it, a new variant of anti-Semitism. And we're already seeing it. There was a case a couple of months ago in a religious school in the Northeast where somebody, dared to say something against the party line of Israel. But we have to be able to, as the Institute is doing, is saying, look, you may not agree with this, but let's talk about it. Let's understand why as intelligent, sensitive, caring human beings. David Bernstein, the CEO and founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. Before we leave, David, once again, if somebody wants to contact you at the Institute,
how do they do that? They can write me at david@jilv.org. I'd be absolutely happy to respond. And they can call me on my line 301-452-8136. That's 301-452-8136. And I'd welcome conversation. We're having a lot of conversations now, and I'd welcome an introductory conversation to what we're doing and how to think about this work together.
David Bernstein, thank you very, very much, David. I wish you good luck. This is
thanks a lot.
A real need to attempt to bring some civility and reason, perhaps, back into this craziness. So take care. Most of all, stay healthy and stay safe right now. And to all of you, thank you again for being with us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, if you'd like to reach me, Rabbi address at jewishsacredaging.com. And to continue our work, we appreciate any donation, a tax-free donation, if you'd like to make one so that we can continue our stuff here. Go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, scroll down to the icon that says donate, click on it, and just follow the easy-to-follow directions. Seekers of Meaning is produced in the broadcast center of Lubetkin Media Companies in bucolic and gorgeous, easy-to-live Cherry Hill, New Jersey, conveniently located to whatever. And we thank our producer, Steve Lubetkin. And before we end, since this is being posted on Friday, May 6th, let me wish a fantastic Mazel Tov to the world's greatest granddaughter, Ayla Grumbacher, on her bat mitzvah this Shabbat. I love you. I love you. I love you. Parashat Kedoshim Mitsuyan. To all of you, thank you very much for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, everyone.